Scientific literature explores the origin of the seven sages who appear as messengers of knowledge after a natural disaster. However, there are very detailed legends worldwide which represent a paradox. The most famous story is that of the flood, after which one of the gods decided to destroy civilization because of its corruption. Welcome to a new episode of Uncovered History. In this episode, we explore the ancient secrets guarded by dedicated priests in Egypt for thousands of years, secrets that contain knowledge that modern science is just beginning to unlock, from genetic engineering to nuclear reactors. Undoubtedly, the scientists and sages of antiquity possessed incredible and mysterious knowledge. When we look back at the Great Flood, we often hear stories about 7 wise men who survived and laid the foundation for the new age of human civilization. Were they men? What did they have to do with building the first ancient temples, including the Egyptian pyramids? Or were they just a figment of someone's imagination? Together, we'll try to find out. A critical testimony dated back to the prehistoric era and was found on the walls of the Temple of Atfu, located between Luxor and Aswan in Upper Egypt. This temple was built between 237 and 157 BC and contained texts that scientists believe are among the few surviving fragments that explain the beginning of the cosmos. Professor Raymond from the University of Manchester explains that these texts contain hidden clues and messages about certain mythical events. Interestingly, the connection between the foundation stone, the construction, and the function of the historical temple falls in the same legendary period. The temple was believed to have been created by the gods, suggesting that, according to the ideas of the time, the Atfu temple was a direct continuation, projection, and reflection of the mythical temple that had existed since the beginning of the world. Dive with us into the ancient mysteries of Egypt and unravel the mysteries surrounding the 7 sages, their connection to the construction of the Egyptian pyramids, and their role in shaping the foundations of human civilization. The phrase, "from the beginning of the world," may refer to the first age, known in ancient Egyptian culture as Zep Tepi. This video delves into the mysteries surrounding the 7 sages, who are believed to have played an essential role in the creation of sacred sites, including the pyramids of Giza. In the same era, the words of the sages are said to have been recorded and handed down in a book that described the location of certain sacred mountains along the Nile. The title of this lost book is Description of the Mountains of Antiquity. The walls of an ancient temple bear inscriptions referring to a group of 7 sages, the only divine beings who knew how to build temples and holy cities. They supervised construction on the Old Hill, which many experts equate with the site of the pyramids of Giza. Another such site is Heliopolis, where there was a sacred peak or hill from which the first sunrise was seen. Thoth, the Egyptian deity, is said to have participated in the activities of the sages. Together, they built the first mythical temples of antiquity, including the Egyptian pyramids, as reported in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Modern archaeologists need more information about the 7 sages and their identities. They have only concluded that they are 7 and play an essential role in the theory of the origin of the world's first sacred sites. The ancient inscriptions also show a flood, described as primordial waves, from which the prehistoric hill rises. This recalls the legend of Noah. The 7 sages also appear in other codices, which raises the question of whether they existed or are just a fragment of someone's imagination. Scientific literature explores the origin of the 7 sages, who appear as messengers of knowledge after a natural disaster. However, there are very detailed legends worldwide which represent a paradox. The most famous story is that of the flood, after which one of the gods decided to destroy civilization because of its corruption. The first book of the Old Testament contains stories reminiscent of legends, in which selected individuals or groups are warned of impending disaster. If these stories are stripped of their fantastic elements, they become historical works that provide insights into humanity's past. One such story is that of Noah, who laid the foundation for a better society by surviving the flood. However, it isn't easy to pinpoint a specific historical time frame for this narrative. Since 1872, discoveries suggest that the biblical narrative of the flood may have been taken from older sources, such as those of the ancient Egyptian deity Aya, and is closely related to Min and Set. In 1849, British archaeologist Sir Austin Laird and his assistant, Hormuzd Rassam, discovered several tile-covered mounds at Huyungyo. They found nearly 25,000 clay tablets, with cuneiform writing that contained intellectual and scientific works on philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. These tablets also describe the kings who ruled before and after a great flood disaster, and they contained Mesopotamia's most famous work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Gilgamesh epic is a legend about a Sumerian hero who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, and like the gods, claimed immortality. German Assyriology professor Theodor Quasman of the University of Cologne found the first lines of this work in the basement of the British Museum in London. The poem was inscribed on 12 clay tablets and survived because the conquerors of Mesopotamia did not recognize cuneiform as writing. These tablets contain over 200 quatrains that are similar to the Bible, written several millennia earlier. However, due to careless handling during shipment to Britain, many tablets were damaged and could no longer be read. Thank you to George Smith, a young employee of the British Museum. The historical significance of these ancient legends became clear. The story of Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu involves battles against the monstrous Humbaba and the Sky Bull, sent by the goddess Ishtar after Gilgamesh rejects her advances. Enkidu later dies of an incurable disease as punishment for helping Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh sets out to find his distant relative, Utnapishtim, to whom the gods have bestowed immortality. The narrative ends as Gilgamesh's journey nears completion, with the story of the immortal Utnapishtim only partially present. The Gilgamesh epic had a missing part that was supposed to be hidden in the palace of Nineveh. George Smith was particularly interested in finding out when Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh about the Great Flood that occurred before their time. However, despite his enthusiasm, Smith was discouraged by the cost of continuing his research in Nineveh. As a lowly employee, it was difficult to secure funding, and finding the clay tablets that might contain evidence contradicting the Bible and providing an alternative source seemed impossible. Fortunately, a London benefactor invested about 1,000 genus, about 40,000 euros, in George Smith's scheme. The London Daily Telegraph also showed interest in Smith's research reports, thus providing access to ancient knowledge. On December 3, 1872, George Smith announced his discovery to an astonished audience at the London Society for Biblical Archaeology. Despite some criticism from the audience, Smith continued to focus on his project and left for Nineveh with his research team in early 1873. Upon arrival, Smith began excavations and found 384 clay tablets, including the missing portions of the story of Utnapishtim. The tablets revealed an account of a great flood, long before the one in the Bible, and contained much more information than the Old Testament. Later in the story, Gilgamesh finds his relative Utnapishtim and asks him how he attained eternal life. The latter tells him about a miraculous flower that grew in a strange place where the gods held their council. Together, they set out for the eastern sea to get the flower. In 1876, George Smith published his theory in the Bible that Noah and Utnapishtim were, in fact, the same man who experienced the same natural disaster. However, it wasn't until August 1998 that Sir Charles Leonard Woolley confirmed Smith's theory with geological evidence. Dr. William Ryan later used 20th century technology to confirm Woolley's findings, suggesting that a natural disaster caused the biblical flood. In addition, more than 300 flood legends refer to the Great Flood, the chosen one appointed by the gods, and the construction of a corresponding work. The inscriptions on the Edfu Temple tell that the 7 wise men came from a small island destroyed by the Great Flood. To sum up, the story of Noah in the Bible may not be entirely accurate, and it may conceal a more mysterious story that reveals the true history of human civilization. This episode of Uncovered History looks at the 7 wise men of ancient Egypt and their role in constructing the Egyptian pyramids and other sacred sites. They also discuss the connections between these figures and the legends of the Great Flood, including the relationship between Noah and Gilgamesh. The journey takes us to the Temple of Atfu, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and ancient inscriptions that offer alternative representations of the Great Flood. The episode emphasizes that the knowledge of the past is complex and fascinating, and that our ancestors possessed deep wisdom and understanding. The episode encourages viewers to explore the secret origins of humanity and learn from our past to create a better future. Viewers are encouraged to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the mysteries of our world. Thank you for gracing us with your presence and taking the time to watch.